McCallum, it's me, Joanna. I'm speaking to you across space.
Well, here we are, in a most odd circumstance. Me here in where I am, and you there where you are. It's a bit like being in space. All irregularities will be handled by the forces controlling each dimension.
Transuranic heavy elements may not be used where there is life.
Medium atomic weights are available: gold, lead, copper, jet, diamond, radium, sapphire, silver and steel.
Sapphire and steel have been signed.
The opening titles, I was fairly clear. I wrote the piece of text. I knew I wanted that. I knew it. It took me a week. You wouldn't believe it's a very simple, 4 or 5 sentences. It took me a week at least to run. And transuranic, that was the gift. That was the absolute trigger that allowed me to then use all the elements and say that then Sapphire and Steel have been assigned.
I received an audio tape of it. It wasn't quite like that. It was a bit strange and a bit manic. And I think sort of mixed up various other elements like concrete and wood. It was just a taster, and it was really a bit of fun. But then it became much more serious when he put the whole thing together with the music.
And 2 weird balls. One was a sort of tangle of old barbed wire, and the other was a sort of spinning blue globe, I think. Excellent.
Pamela Lonsdale I worked with before on Ace of Wands and Shadows, I think it was. Yeah, she asked me to put together a half-hour episode that could a self-contained half-hour episode that could possibly spin to a series, and so I created the very first episode of Sapphire and Steel, which was then called The Time Benders.
But it had been turned down by various companies. It had been turned down by Thames, and I said they're mad because this is absolutely it's wonderful. What PJ has is this huge gift of making something ordinary. Knock at a door, and it comes at a moment. And things became sinister with him, and this script had it.
But Jeremy Isaacs, the controller of Thames at the time, said no, it had no mileage, and so it was rejected. So then Lewis Rudd at Southern TV Children's picked it up and said he was interested, but could I do a breakdown of another 5 episodes? And I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't sure where to take it. But in the meantime, ATV had seen it, and David Reed had seen the first episode, and it frightened the life out of him. And he said, I don't want to see any breakdowns. He said, I just want to do it as it is. And he commissioned there and then. And then Sean came on board, and that's how it was born.
I mean, I was immensely excited. Right, they said you can make a children's programme, and we'll give you a budget of 5,000 above the line.
The first 2 or 3 episodes, I thought it's going to still be in a children's slot of say 5:30 in the evening. So I was thinking it was going to be low budget and fairly unknown. And by that time they decided to up it to an adult slot at 7 o'clock.
Somehow then, I can't remember why, could have been a casting lady who said, you should get someone like McCallum. OK, I said, let's send him a script.
And I think that would have then gone through the normal channels of agents and whatever. And I read the first script and said, I think this is great stuff. I'd love to do this.
So once he's on, his fee's 5,000, so that's the budget shot to hell. I mean, that's the end of that. So then you've got to have somebody to match McCallum. And there were various people putting all their favourite girlfriends or favourite stars in. And it was Francis Essex who said, why don't you try the lovely Joanna Lumley?
And it seemed such a thrilling idea, the series. It was so exciting, because I think all of us are quite interested in the paranormal. And the idea of working with David McCallum was irresistible. I liked the name of it, Sapphire and Steel. I thought it was a beautiful, elegant name. And I couldn't wait to get started.
And they liked each other. They worked well together.
When I got to the studio and met Joanna, we seemed to like each other quite well. I know I adore her, and she still calls me McCallum. And she and Sean have become basically lifelong friends since then.
And I couldn't think of anyone better, so I was very pleased about that.
I don't know you. Only the policeman at the point.
The policeman at the point isn't coming. I've contacted him and told him that everything now here is under control.
But it isn't.
I know. That's why we're here, not him.
I'd written fantasy in the past for children's programmes. I'd written a lot of investigative stories for various police shows. And I rarely wrote about police procedure itself. I wrote about strange, disturbing stories on the edge of crime. So this was a way of combining the two, an investigative story, which encompassed science fiction and pure fantasy. And so you had two detectives coming to mend time, if you like.
A greater power has assigned these two people to sort out some of the muddles that are appearing on Earth. They're never major. There's a haunted room or something uneasy or some sense of injustice. There is a corridor.
It can't be explained to him.
It can, in a way, but not by you, perhaps. There is a corridor, and the corridor is time. It surrounds all things, and it passes through all things.
It's when time goes wrong, these are two detectives who come to put things right, and they help people in danger. But what we try to create all the way through, that the people who are in danger were everyday simple people.
But sometimes time can try to enter into the present, break in, burst through and take things, take people. The corridor is very strong, it has to be, but sometimes in some places it becomes weakened, like fabric, worn fabric. And when there is pressure put upon the fabric,
Time comes in.
reaches in and takes out what it wants. And we think that time has broken into that room, broken through, and taken away your parents. I'm certain that Sapphire and Steel were aliens. I'm certain that they came from the very beginning, that lovely ringing kind of voice of God and the sort of zooming kind of spacey kind of credits which rolled at the beginning. I'm certain that meant that they came from outer space.
I've not known for 28 years, and no one else seems to know, and no one else seems to have cared, and no one's asked. And I've had lots of fan letters over the years from various generations, and no one yet has asked that question. So I think leave it as it is for the time being.
You know, the scripts were all about these two extraordinary, impossible creatures that came down. And there was a sort of steel, there was a whole idea of being very, I don't know, tight-lipped and tight-brained and brilliant and can do anything. So there was a robotic element to the whole thing.
David Steele, he saw himself as Steele and he played Steele, and that was what he based his character on, Steele. He was absolutely straight and hard and clean. Durable. That was him.
So this is where it all started for him. His death started here.
Great wars, civil wars, holy wars.
You know, sometimes I wonder why they bother to send us here. It's not enough. That amount of resentment, it's not enough.
Well, I needed to, again, it's going back to almost like police procedure again, where you have the sweet cop and the sour cop. So one to soften them up and the other one to come and get on with the business, and that's what they were doing, really.
And I think that Sapphire irritates Steele a bit because he's light years ahead of her, but he does need her to do the donkey work, which he simply can't do, which is sensing, pulling time back, reversing time, and in a strange way combating the darkness, the evil. She's usually the kind of maiden tied to the rock for the dragon, you know. She's the one who is pushed out in front. Nothing.
What about the top?
Yes. There's something. Somewhere. It's not very strong, but it's somewhere here.
Sapphire was an element. She regarded herself as an element. I regarded her as a very beautiful woman with feelings, which, of course, I was not right and she was right.
Well, we know for certain that Steele wasn't really human. He didn't really have any human qualities or a human heart. And so part of the tension between them was that Sapphire did, for some reason, she was able to sympathise or empathise with people who lived on Earth, with human beings. Although she was an element, they were elements. Steele simply did things by his head.
Give me details.
It's just cold. Oh, it's a strange sort of cold, like
Like at the bottom of the sea.
no, the other extreme.
What?
It's like high in the air. The air is thin, it's a high altitude.
But it's still dark.
No, the sun is shining. It's very bright. It's almost dazzling. It's gone.
What I wanted to avoid was travelling backwards and forwards in time. This was about time invading, coming into the present day. So having done that, then you have to give them the kind of powers to, if you like, to be the puncture repair kit, to repair the time break for the time being.
You were making time go back.
Yes. I'll sit down and get on with the breakfast.
Then why can't you take it back 24 hours or
A
more?
little bit more, look.
Why can't you take it back to just before yesterday when my parents were still here?
I haven't the power to take time back that far. If I had, don't you think I'd have done it?
I suppose so.
We never showed blood, we never used knives, we never used guns. We just provided fear.
Perhaps when you finish telling the boy about the nicer aspects of our job, you'd tell him about the dangers.
He knows about them.
He knows about them. About the dangers in this house.
So children do like to be frightened, and I think that if there's some sense of resolution, I think horrifying is different from frightening. Frightening, we all go, oh no, sometimes burst into tears, but I think horrible I don't like. I don't like necks being sawed off or real cruelty. I don't like that. We didn't have any of that.
I wouldn't write that. I don't like writing that. Wouldn't want to. Again, this is the things that prey on our own minds. We turn our own fears back onto ourselves, our own nightmares.
And I had no qualms about what we were doing because I don't think there was anything particularly graphic. There may have been flashes of things here and there, but no, not the same as some of the things you see on television nowadays.
At the beginning, they said, can we have, after they commissioned the first story, they said we're going to run for, I think it was we're going to run for 12, no, for 14. So because they're going to run for 14, I thought, well, this is going to be more or less 14 episodes. There was no way of working out a division between one story and the next, although the first story did end at number 6. I couldn't think of titles. I thought of one since. I think that the railway station should have been called The Girls Who Gave Them Flowers.
I think when we were filming, they were just called sort of episode 2, episode 3 of whatever script you were on. I think we must have referred to them in some way. We would talk about them as the children photograph story or the soldier story. I mean, just to differentiate them.
Well, that was me. I should have done that as a producer, shouldn't I? I should have had that corrected. I don't think I ever thought about it. I just took it as it came.
If they'd said at the time, could you think of titles, I would have done that. But it just wasn't thought of at that moment. So we had no points of reference ourselves. We just went by episode numbers.
The show, as I remember, is very specific in the way it's presented. And it speaks for itself. I don't think you could change it.
And Sapphire and Steel was word heavy, definitely word heavy, but it was also ideas heavy. But so all the modern stuff you see in that kind of genre is very light on text.
With a story of this nature, you have to sort of take a breath and just explain a little bit more before you go on. Otherwise, you end up nowhere and people don't understand what on earth is going on.
He dragged it in there and held it there for a while, but then he decided to take his apparatus apart. In here was a force that had adopted not just one human shape, but many, trapped and held by their own reflections.
There are 17 mirrors in this house.
Yes, now we know where he's hiding. We've got him.
The fact that it was dialogue heavy was the style of that show at the time. And also because we were poor, we couldn't do anything. There was a limit to what we could actually do. And as everything was on special effects, you sort of had to talk your way through it in case the special effect wasn't whizzy enough or fantastic enough. And P.J. Hammond is a writer who enjoys words.
I think it was because it was tied to studio bound. There had to be a fair bit of that.
What exactly are they guilty of? And what have they used as a time source?
That's capable of everything.
Yeah, well, there's one thing it hasn't been capable of doing. Something decided to disobey it, remember? The left hand, the past, the right hand, the future. I mean, what would happen if...
Steal. It's dangerous.
I know, I live dangerously.
And what would happen if you disappeared as well?
You just have to cope as best you can.
You know what it can do.
I know very well what it can do.
Steele, remember, it's watching you, it's listening to you.
Don't you see? That's what I'm relying on.
You cannot take that chance.
All right. All right. I'm just going to talk to it.
I was very happy not getting behind the scenes because Sean O'Riordan's got a great deal of opinions. Whoever was producing or directing it at the time, people like David Foster, whoever it was, producing, P.J. Hammond, who was quite a remote figure, and McCallum, this is plenty men. And they do not need one yapping woman, so I kept my nose clean.
I think her input would have been valuable. I think, it's not exactly a boys' team. I suppose it was like saying it's all playing boys' games. They weren't really. I mean, her input was important, and I think I would have listened.
The boys ran the show, right? That was David and me. Because David's an amazing man. He doesn't stop at the he doesn't stop in front of the camera. He actually comes into the office and we work out the script.
David McCallum was a worrier about his part. If certain things he thought were not in character, he would certainly complain and come and talk to me about it.
I've sat on the floor of my office with a script we couldn't get working properly, with pages cut up and put there and taped there, and he worked with me till 2 o'clock in the morning. He was a delight, and he was a delight about everything on the stage, on the set, in the studio.
My only real creative process was in the one in the railway station.
The platform again. Something changing, something happening.
And the platform was there, and it was black at either end. And I asked Sean if I could do something, and I went away and got a very large piece of white cardboard, 3 by 3, and cut the top round, and took 2 safety pins and went down to the black drapes and hung the white card on the black drapes. So now when you look down the platform, you could see a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel you could see the light. And it was the most extraordinary perspective it gave. You can see it when it's there. I mean, there is a tunnel and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's just a piece of cardboard.
He was interested in everything. The cameramen loved him because he would always be in the right place. He'd always give them the right. He was incredibly professional.
The rehearsals with Joanna and Sean, and there was a considerable friction between Joanna and Sean, which was very healthy and fun to watch.
Making Joanna's eyes blue was a long, tedious session in the studio.
Well?
I can't make any sense of it.
What kind of animal is it?
I remember very well wearing the blue contact lenses. They were, in fact, completely clear. They had no lens, they weren't, because I didn't need... But you put them in, and then you put in eye drops, which were like dropping ink in, which was absorbed immediately into these blue lenses. When you wore them for some time, because they were really quite blue, when you took them out, the world seemed red.
Joanna's head had to be held. She had to have something behind her like that. She had to keep absolutely still. The lighting had to be perfect. The camera had to be lined up absolutely perfect. And then the boys upstairs were moving some blue dots to align them up with her irises. And it took a long time, and Joanna managed to sort of stay acting somehow. She'd have to do all her speech. But if you look at the show, you'll probably find that every time her eyes are blue, her head is rock solid and still, right? Because we couldn't move them around.
Show me. They keyed out the colour of the blue that they could get in my eyes, which meant that, of course, they then couldn't use my clothes, or the clothes would have keyed out as well.
The nature of effects has changed out of all recognition. We were, I think, one of the last shows whereby the effects, the visual effects, were handmade.
It was fairly primitive, but the very worst thing I had to do was when they decided that the blackness, the darkness, evil had taken over the inside of Sapphire's head. And they made me some eye covers. I can't call them contact lenses because they were as thick as plastic egg boxes. And they painted them black and stuck them into my eyes. And of course my eyes just streamed. So they sent for a doctor who gave me an anaesthetic jab in my eyes. And then they stuck these bits of plastic in.
It'll meet us where we were.
Our special effects were, if you like, done with a knife and fork. But there were some wonderful things achieved by people taking time and caring about how they got the effects.
If we had had the facility of digital enhancement or digital sort of effects, I believe Sapphire Steel would have lost some of its penetration, its power, its intensity, its concentration.
People can see through CGI these days. They've seen it in adverts, and I think it's, I think but just a sleight of hand in the performances and the various tricks.
Because I think one of the things that happens with the facility, the enormous facility of making these shows with effects from a computer, is that they become sort of they become too easy. People get sort of used to them. They just sort of see hundreds of things whizzing by or whizzing away, and it ceases to have the kind of power which we were forced to use. The acting and the strength of the thinking that went into them was heavier than it is now with a computer-generated effect.
The Honourable Miles and Mrs. Cavendish?
Yes. Miles and Virginia. I didn't send that card.
Cavendish. Oh, yes, he must be that chap who deals in futures.
Would he mean all our futures?
I didn't write the fifth story because I was still writing against the clock, and I'd probably written too much in a short space of time, and I was quite exhausted at that time, and I couldn't think of something within the time slot available.
See, it was so extraordinary. It was this demand for more episodes to the point where Peter actually said, I can't think of anything.
So I had to take just a bit of time out. So so Sean had to find somebody else to fill that gap.
Yes, Arthur? You look very handsome. Oh, the first guests.
Yes. Now it all begins.
I liked it least of all because I quite liked us in our strange, spare way. I liked the way we didn't belong anywhere, and it seemed odd to jump us out of time. But it was an attractive story and beautifully made.
Yeah, it's not the direction I would have gone in, but I mean, it's nice to have a variation. I think people enjoy that episode.
We were beginning to think you quite deserted us.
We were just changing.
My dear, what a delightful dress. So elegant. I wish I was still young enough to wear fashionable things like that.
You mean they're back in fashion?
But when you're 60, it's too late.
I had an idea, a feeling, because I think things were changing at ATV. I think various different people were going to be in power and taking over.
This is the trap. This place, you see, this place is nowhere. And it's forever.
I think we ran out of time in that last story when I wanted them inside a picture looking out, but there wasn't time to show that, which would have been scary. But instead, we hung that picture up in the sky. We hung that cafe up in the sky, and they were trapped in there.
Yes, Joanna and I have been trapped in a room in a window ever since.
But I didn't like us being up there. I still don't like us being up there. Maybe we could do one more episode where McCallum and I, in our present day, having been stuck in time, managed to vanquish it.
I love actors and writers, they always have this feeling when they have a series and it has a limited run that it'll come back, you know. So I think the writers sit down, well, I'll put them in space in a cupboard or something because then somebody will want to know what happened to them. But as far as I know, the Sapphire and Steel, if they are in a cupboard in space, are still there.
In my original script, I had Silver trapped in there with them because I figured he could have worked something with the cutlery drawer and got them out of there. But I think David McCallum felt that as the show was called Sapphire and Steel, he shouldn't be there in the end. It's not something I would have wanted, but it was something I think he insisted on and the producers agreed with him. But that would have been the get out. But because he wasn't there, there was no cutlery drawer to be fixed, so they were there forever. So it's the end of the show.
There wasn't another series, that's all there was. I don't know whether P.J. Hammond would have written another series, and I don't know whether we all thought, well then if it's not going to be P.J., it isn't worth doing.
That was the end, wasn't it? No, that was the end. He'd said that was the end. That was it, because he got rid of them, didn't he?
I was very happy the way it came out, yeah. I have no complaints. I don't think I could have... It was a great team. I don't think it could have been better. I think that's why it stood the test of time, because it was a very quirky story, but all the right people arrived at the right time to take part.
They were great. They were great for me to do, and I really sort of felt I realised myself as a director in those. That was very, very nice. I liked them.
Well, it's interesting because I've done a few shows in my life that are still extant, I think is the word. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. seems to be absolutely timeless and go on forever. The Outer Limits is another show. Even Night Gallery and some of the ones we did here. Sapphire and Steel falls into that, and I think it's because there is an element of cult.
I loved being in Sapphire and Steel, and I love it that nowadays, even now, nearly 30 years later on, people send me, from fan magazines where you can buy pictures of, you know, one during one's life in Bond films or Coronation Street or Patsy or the New Avengers. I get an enormous amount of photographs of me as Sapphire or me with David as Sapphire and Steel sitting in our chairs.